and welcome to Design Talk. My name is Daniel DeGreve, and I am an architect with David B. Maleka Architects here in Columbus. And I will be serving as the moderator for today's panel discussion. So I'll begin here on my right, Tim Lai of Tim Lai Architect. And I want to begin. I'll introduce the project, and I'll read a comment from the jury for each one. So, Tim's project was Willow Theater, and one of the jury comments was, the references to the fleece wrapper and the willow tree effectively instill a playfulness to the skin of the structure and suggest a cloud-like transition between inside and out. Next to Tim is Joe Meyer with Design Group, correct? And he was a project manager for the Battelle Darby Creek Metro Park Nature Center. And one of the comments for that project was, one of the most thoughtful projects in terms of considering the choreography of movement through the site, especially the approach to the building with the bermed landscape entry path and the porch framing the meadow beyond. Then we have Mike Soriano of NBBJ, and his project was for the Driving Park branch of the Columbus Public Library. Fun, almost optimistic building in a somewhat tough neighborhood. The connection to the outside is nice, a lot of light on the inside. We have Jack Hedge with Design Group, and he is responsible for the Kenton County Public Library project, which is in Covington, Kentucky. One of several projects that attempt to both alter an existing outdated program as well as rebrand a tired community institution. This one was perhaps a bit exuberant with the sheer number of interventions, yet there is purposeful logic to all the pieces. We have Mike Bongiorno of Design Group, and his project was the Maloney Family Health and Wellness Center here in Columbus. One of the most consistent projects in terms of plan clarity, economy, and restraint, using modest moves to achieve maximum impact. And then finally we have Jennifer Son with Ron Seidel, and the project is Hopkins Hall at Ohio State University. Interesting from a sustainability standpoint, one of the more significant projects. This is exactly what architects should be doing, taking these horribly performing buildings and not just replacing windows, but improving the composition. This is a difficult balance to achieve and knowing where to stop. So with that, I will begin. I'll let Tim begin, actually, taking a few minutes to describe his project, and then we'll go so forth with everybody.
Okay. Sure. Let's see what we got here. Well, I mean, this project obviously is one of the more unconventional projects, I would say, that we normally see in a design award submission, or in general, I guess. It's a temporary structure for a temporary theater. 120 people can fit, or 150 people can sit in it. Apparently, I think one of the interesting about that project is an incredibly simple, almost stupid concept. I mean, we are given it's a design competition. We're given a very tight, small courtyard. It's a historic, very old, used to be a staple for the castle actually next door, so you can kind of see the plan. Do they just go through or something, or can we go back?
Yeah.
Well, this is fine. No, this is fine. So this is the building, obviously, and this is the courtyard is what we're dealing with. So originally, we thought about, okay, courtyard, we can do a lot of interesting things, create interesting objects, but then quickly we realized that we just don't have any space. So very quickly we realized that the problem really is to create a somewhat tolerable transition, really, between the building, the existing building, the structure, and the theater itself. So that's really a very simple diagram. If you go back to the sketch, you'll see that, this one. So this is really kind of started the whole thing, the whole idea of having this kind of very soft transition from the courtyard into the theater to create a very kind of interesting transition. And the horticulture fleet is really it's funny that one of the collaborator of this project, came to us, and he's actually a professor in the theater department in Ohio State, and he just has used those fabric on a stage, on a set design, and he really wants to use that as a recyclable material, as a material that's incredibly light, incredibly inexpensive, and you can actually do a lot of things with it. And so we kind of just take it and kind of run with it. So it's almost like a happy coincidence that the things kind of appears to be what it looks like. So I guess I'm running out of time.
You actually have 1 more minute.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, one of the surprise of the project, if you go to the far back, maybe I don't know if it has anything at the back. Yeah. So the photograph. So one of the surprise of this project is really how much movement those fabric actually create. And when I was there, the whole thing is almost like this kind of underwater, like instead of a willow tree, like originally I thought it was like just a very subtle movement, so we call it the willow theater. But in reality, it's more like a jellyfish. That the way that it moves, it's almost like a jellyfish underwater. The way that the fabric actually moved in the wind, and it took us like 2 hours just to unwrap everything before we photographed the structure. I mean, it's just taking forever. So that's kind of the surprise for that material.
Very good. Well, I'd like to move down the line to Joe with the Battelle Darby Creek project. So I'm going to just advance the slides so we can get those coordinated.
So the Battelle Darby Creek Nature Center, this was really the hub of a 7,000 acre Metro Park that Metro Parks has been continuously acquiring the land and trying to restore the prairie, but it kind of lacked a center of activity for all of the school groups and other people that are coming in there every day. So we had this really just absolutely beautiful site to work with in a kind of restored prairie from that used to be farmland. Now they've been working to turn it back into the prairie ecology that had been there before. Kind of keep going on the slides. So you can see the kind of scale of this park relative to the city. It's just absolutely enormous. It's about as big as all of the other metro parks combined. Keep going. So a really crucial thing with this project, we wanted to bring people kind of into that prairie landscape first and have their impression of the site and the environment be really dominated by that prairie before they ever really got to the building. So that led to creating this very long procession from the parking to the building, and then framing the landscape at the end of that procession rather than having you kind of end up at a monumental front door. So there's kind of a monumental frame and a monumental porch, but not a monumental front door. So here is that porch, affording views down to the grazing pasture and the bison. The plan was really generated through a really careful study of the topography, trying to achieve that balance between kind of lowering the building enough that when you approach it, kind of disappears, but also keeping it up high enough that you still get the nice view on the south side, and also to keep it out of the very strict boundaries that are a part of the Darby Watershed Accord. They're really strict setbacks for the creeks around there. So on the north side, the building kind of sits over the knoll. This is from the top of that knoll. And it creates a kind of a learning courtyard that's protected a little bit between the building and the hillside. Inside, there are a lot of exhibition spaces. This is kind of the primary exhibition space next to what it's called Living Stream. That's sort of it's mimicking the riparian habitat that's in the Darby Creek itself. Everything in the stream was brought from the creek itself, including the water. There's a pump that can bring new creek water up because it has the right biology for the organisms inside. The material palette was really inspired by the kind of vernacular in the area, the barns, that kind of thing. We really didn't want the building to look like a barn at all, but the corrugated siding, the wood roof deck was really kind of taken from that local imagery. Really, this kind of section through the hill was part of the inspiration for the whole project was just kind of this building kind of coming out of the hill, being of the hill rather than kind of perched on top of it. And I think the next photo, this is kind of what we wanted to get out of that. So it, like pushing it over the edge of the hill a little bit more to get that effect. And then really you don't kind of understand the true size of the building until you get around to the south, especially if you go one more slide, I think. It's a lot bigger than it first initially appears. It also helps when you have really dramatic sunsets when you happen to go out and photograph the building.
That's the view of the bison, by the way.
Yeah, the bison. Yeah, the bison get this view of the project. That's
You don't get to go out there.
Yeah. Well, and then this is on the path down to the creek from the parking area. The people do get a little bit of the view from the south, but it's not quite as far away as the bison eye view.
Okay, very good. I'd like to then advance to Mike Sriano on the Driving Park Branch Library.
Great. Thank you, guys. I think the jury comment was almost optimistic, so I guess that's good, right? It's always a challenge to, I think, like sum up these projects. So kudos to everybody, but some of these projects in like 15 slides. So I think they're like big stories to be told. So Driving Parks got a pretty large story. It's the first project in the library's 2020 vision plan. There are obviously a lot of libraries going on right now around the city. And this was about 15,000 square feet out Livingston, at the corner of Livingston and Kelton. One of the things that was very important to the project was really understanding how how the library and how just an entity like it can be really critical to how a catalyst in a community, I think, that really benefit from it. And I think the reception has been pretty good so far. Really, the site strategy was pretty simple in terms of siting it. We were just this kind of technical, but we were in an urban commercial overlay, so the buildings had to be pushed towards the street and parking at the rear. We really wanted to capitalize on the corner of Livingston and Kelton, just in terms of prominence and visibility. So you go to the next slide. There also is a story about libraries relative to what they are doing right now, and a lot of people have, at the outset of the project, have asked the question whether there's a need for books anymore and what libraries do in the community. And I think what we try to understand is what traditionally libraries represented in communities, which was kind of this this place where you went to get knowledge. And what we're realizing now is that libraries are a lot more than just a place to get stuff and get resources. It's really a place for kind of social exchange. And so how that looks compared to maybe a traditional library, I think, was really important to the way we thought about the project. And so what we started to do was understand how the library could be split, turned inside out, and really kind of a very simple idea, but taking one of their key components to this was flexibility, and how they take the stuff that's always changing, and how a library wants to change over time, and how to make that evident in the building. So we really took all the stuff that's typically at the center and put it towards the outside, where it benefited from natural light and from exposure to the street, interaction with the outside. And so as this kind of laid out, you can see that the stuff towards the south, this is north is up, towards the south, and is really kind of the more flexible, highly active space, and the stuff to the north is really the more utilitarian staff space, the stuff that was highly structured. So we can keep going. This diagram really illustrates that. And so we wanted the outside of the project to really kind of express a posture of progressive nature of where libraries sit and how it speaks to its environment. And so we wanted to use a material palette that was somewhat raw in a sense of obviously everything's on a budget. So how does the exterior respond kind of in a different way, using materials that come together maybe in a different way? So we outset the glass. We wrapped it in this what's traditionally decking material, and then we created apertures throughout the building that kind of have these framed views, that either for entry or for specific moments in the project where it became necessary. This is a view from the south. And I think this kind of illustrates the kind of movement in this urban pocket off of Livingston that we were really trying to invoke. The interior is based on, for those that don't know, Driving Park is actually named after an actual racetrack that was built down the street a while ago. So this area was built around the rail car. And so we wanted to somehow pay homage to that in the interior of the building. So there's this organizational element on the inside that is called a racetrack, and we're using it kind of in a way that helps to, number one, organize space, bring natural light into the building, and also house some of the media and assets of the library. So it has this kind of performative nature to it. And so really all the spaces are built around kind of identifying these objects, that racetrack, and we're letting the furniture and the stuff that kind of it changes over time, we kept the palette neutral as far as interior materials go, and we have the furniture kind of be the stuff that's easily changed. We let that be a little bit more vibrant.
Jack, if you could introduce your project, which is also a library for Kenton County.
Okay, let me go a few pages here. We'll get to this library. This is in Covington, Kentucky, which if you've ever been there, most of the urban fabric is still there, which is really nice in this community. And the library, actually, this existing library was built in the 70s, but it's in the center of the historic district you can kind of see the existing here. It's a building with really small slit windows. The issue with that was the owner really wanted a project that became a destination in Covington. And on the same street, if you've ever been to Covington, right down the river, on the same street is the big Ascent, the big tower. So this is on the same street, about 3 blocks away. And they wanted something that would draw the attention to this building. So you can see kind of what was done here with a program was to take a 52,000 square feet building and make it 65,000 square feet. And what we did was, the idea was to wrap the building, change the function changed completely in the building. We had to reorient the entrance to a different side of the building functionally. And so the additions were placed really to meet the function of the library and to change the image completely, for the library. Well, let me just explain too. The building was 3 stories, and we reoriented the building and created a new atrium space that actually organized those 3 levels with that, and then made all you see here with the idea of the screen here was, as you enter the site, you can only enter it's 2 one-way streets, so there's only one corner, and this is the corner over here that you see. And we reoriented the entrance to the other side, so we had to bring something to draw your eye down to the new entrance. So this screen here flows and it draws your eye. And this is a 3-story entrance. The other issue was that the main level was 7 feet above grade. And how the existing building had a big ramp and all those kind of things, this new atrium solves that issue by coming in at a half level with an elevator that went up half level to the main entrance. And then in. The other issue, it seems a little strange, but a big driving thing with this function was it had to have a drive-up window for book pickup and return, and that has to be in the circulation workroom, which also has to have a relationship with the front door. You can see here, it ramps up there, and we were able to put a ramp in that gets you right to that same spot. So functionally, all those functions came together. As part of that, you can see the 3-story atrium that really links the levels. One of the other big issues with the building was creating outdoor space in this urban environment. And
Those images are at the end.
yeah, okay, well, they stay there. You can. The other issue was that we needed to bring light into this building. And we took one of the center bays and just popped it up to give. And we made sure it was south and north light for sustainability. So we used daylighting and we screened the sun on the summertime from the south side. So we created a daylit space which really opened up the building. You can see the shelving was all on wheels. This did have a very big book collection we had to keep, so it can be changed around and moved around all the shelving. You see sectionally here how the new 3-story atrium linked all the levels, and then the clear story that was popped up in the middle. But like I said, the other big issue was it's an urban library, but we needed outdoor space for story time for the children's area, which was put in a lower level. So we took sunken court, created a sunken court outdoors with this kind of a private area downtown, yet it was still an urban area and an outdoor space that was linked right to it. We had to do a new stairway, and that actually divided these two areas and kind of created two smaller spaces that worked out for the story time room, but also then for the staff outdoor area as well.
Well, moving on to Mike Longiorno to the Maloney Family Health and Wellness Center.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So if I wish I was Rob Livesey right now because I would have brought a laser pointer with me.
Yes, I
But
asked.
I don't, so I'm just going to point with my bottle or something. No, that's all right.
It's right here, isn't it?
Yeah, you're. So projects are interesting for a variety of reasons, whether it's the architecture or the program or the client or all three. What ended up being a fairly simple building was actually, though contains a fairly complex set of clients. The city of Columbus owns the building proper, but within the space itself is Columbus Public Health, and they're part of the city of Columbus Neighborhood Health Centers, and they're sort of a separate entity from the city itself, but partly funded by it, and the Ohio State University. And Columbus Neighborhood Health Centers has got a program for getting neighborhood health centers into struggling areas that they've been working on for a number of years. There's one on the east side, there's one that we worked on the west side, and then there's this one on South Parsons Avenue. A lot of people are confused about where this is, so if anyone's old enough to remember, I guess, it's where Schottenstein's used to be. That's kind of the site that it sits on right now, on South Parsons, just north of some of my favorite buildings in Columbus, which are the Buckeye Steel, I don't know if they call it Buckeye Steel anymore, it's Columbus Steel Castings, some fantastic buildings, and partly kind of influenced some of the way that we thought about materials on the project. But strategically on the site, obviously Columbus has got a strong alley system, secondary alley system, and so the building partially relates to that. And similar to Dryden Park, there's an urban commercial overlay. Some of the early struggles with the project working with the client was people wanted a 2-story building. We argued that you should have a 1-story building that responds in some scale way to the street condition, but that is stretched to the entire length of the site to help kind of occupy what was a really deficient streetscape. It was basically entirely blown out there. There's a secondary north-south alley system called Goethe Alley, and that basically, we wanted to preserve that as part of the development, and so our parking and our bioswales and a lot of our site stormwater retention is done using that. Next slide. So that sort of registration of the alley system became a way to create a sort of a nodal kind of entry to the building that would have both a Parsons Avenue pedestrian, bike, and bus entrance, as well as a plaza from the rear that serves the parking lot itself. So this kind of gives you an idea of kind of how the building's situated on the site and how you can achieve a 1-story building by varying heights of different components. Particularly that entryway became a kind of a symbol, a significant way to kind of identify where the entry was, as well as to create additional scale. And we had a mix of room types. I mean, there's a lot, we worked as hard as we could to get as many active spaces as possible on the perimeter, particularly on the Parsons Avenue perimeter. But the reality is in a health center, you're gonna have a bunch of exam rooms. And so there was a combination of some high windows and low windows, but we worked strategically to kind of work those in. That spine that's created in the center of the building, actually, the complexity in this building is that all these operators in the building might operate at different hours, and so resolving security was really complicated in this because OSU and CNHC occupied a similar footprint, but had to have different accommodations after hours, as well as Columbus Public Health, which is in the northern end of the site, or northern end of the building. And so there's a sort of medical mall kind of concept to that over time the city says if they move out, we can sell that off or lease that out as retail space for other individual users. So the building was designed to be really flexible into the future. It's a health center now, but it doesn't necessarily have to be one in the future. And so this is kind of coming in off of Parsons, looking out toward the west. To the left is registration. Next slide. Similar view later in the evening. Again, Michael referred earlier to frame views from within the building. Was really kind of a critical consideration here. Connectivity to the exterior. This is that sort of medical mall that we referred to earlier. That's one of the corner offices. So you really do feel connected. And there's a different philosophy, I think, nowadays for how to build in struggling areas. You used to build fortresses. Now we're finding that you put more glass into buildings. Actually, people are not suspicious of what's going on inside, and so they end up taking care of it a little better. No one's throwing rocks at the windows, I guess is what I'm saying, which is one of the pushbacks we got early on working with the community was there's too much glass in the building. People in our community are going to throw rocks through them, and we've not seen any of that. This is OSU's Mom to Beat program. Basically, it takes pregnant mothers or that don't know how to cook, basically, and don't know how to manage a home. And it there's a demonstration kitchen here and a lot of learning classrooms. But they've used this then throughout the broader community to use as a resource space. And just some interior views. We use a very simple palette. In terms of the exterior materials, this was a pretty contentious conversation early on in the project. The brick is dark, close to black, and it's pretty high contrast with the white. And I like stories, so I'm going to tell you a story. When we first showed this to the mayor's staff, the mayor was really involved in this project. When we first showed it to the mayor's staff, they said he's going to hate it. The building's too contemporary. It's too. The brick is scary, and so we went. We presented to him, and you know how Mayor Coleman is, and he sat in his chair and he's just quiet the whole time, and he sat back. He's like, "This is some good damn architecture," and he said, "I don't want any red brick on this. I want that black brick." So it was a really great moment of kind of like pushing things a little bit to get what you really believe is the right thing to do and worrying about the rest later. So I don't know, I ran on too long, I'm sure.
You did a little bit. That's okay. We're pretty fluid here.
You gotta cut me off.
Jennifer, I'd like to then have you introduce us to the project that you did for Hopkins Hall at Ohio State.
Yep. So Mike mentions there are plenty of ways that projects can be interesting. This one started as a window replacement job. Then when the CBEC building at Ohio State got funded, all of a sudden became a renovation job to house new functions that were going to be moved from Haskett Hall over to Hopkins. And then it followed about 6 months later by activation of a complete mechanical systems improvement job. So it really evolved over a long span of time into what it ended up with. The goals of the project, first from a very functional standpoint, we had to take the functions that were moving out of Haskett being demoed and fit it into a footprint that would offer us about 20% less square footage. And then for a, kind of the touchy-feely part of the project, the director of the program really was looking to elevate the image of the arts department. They were having difficulty competing with other schools for the highest functioning graduate students and faculty that they wanted, just because their facilities were perceived as so deficient. And so they really needed an image overhaul. The moving of the functions from Haskett into Hopkins placed the center of the arts program right on the oval at OSU, surrounded by other arts functions buildings. So it was really an opportunity to make a center for arts education right here. So I haven't really been watching the way the slides have gone. Sorry. So right here in that section, the numbers on there's a basement, then a first, second, third, and fourth floor. So on floors 2 and 3, that's where the largest part of our interior renovation really focused. Took the 2 largest programs moving over from Haskett, which was the photography and the printmaking studios, and put them into that space. I'm not sure if you made it all the way through to the double-loaded corridor photo, but the existing building was very institutional. And was set up on a double-loaded corridor. Keep going. There you go. So that's what it looked like. And so we took those 2 floors and we completely gutted. And we moved the studio space to the north end of that, the north face of that wing, so we get all that wonderful light coming in. And then right here, this is the south face of that wing. We located circulation and a gallery used for crits and for display. This really, one of our strategies for dealing with that reduction in square footage available to us was to double up on some of the functions of the space. So if you can go to a plan, I'm sorry, I can't say where it is. You can see how the studio spaces, here we go. Numbers 2, 3, 4 up there. This is the printmaking studio up there, and we needed to keep the space pretty as fluid as possible so that you could have in one area teaching going on, while in another spot that really needs to use the same equipment, you could have studio space for the students to actually be working on projects. So worked through with the departments and how we could double up on some of those uses to achieve what they needed to in terms of their square footage restraints. The most gratifying thing about the whole project, I'm really happy to report, is we did achieve the ultimate goal for the arts department. And I heard great stories about how students and faculty that they had really tried to recruit prior to the renovation and had looked to other schools. Actually, there were several of them that came back to OSU following this renovation because it offered, it offered better facilities than what they had seen before. I'm sorry, one other thing. What I love also so much about this project is the way that the building communicates the function to the university and to the streets. This faces a courtyard. The other elevation right outside those would, here we go, here, this is 17th. So as you're in these 2 major vantage points to view the building, you can really get a sense of what's going on inside. So that you can see that arts education looks very different from math or other sciences and such, and really is a great advertisement for the program that they have there. So, fun project.
I didn't realize that was the end. Very good, thank you all. One of the things that struck me, a couple of things that struck me, the commonalities with several of these projects, and I want to refer to my notes here just so that I am as coherent as possible. 3 things. Obviously, site context was very important to each of these projects, and I think it always should be, and typically is for an award-winning project. But I think there are very compelling stories here with these 6 projects in particular. And that's both in terms of the urban as well as the natural landscape. The second one would be architecture as socio-cultural intervention. We certainly saw that with a number of these projects. And then the one I think I want to lead off with a talking point for our panelists to discuss is architecture as physician. Making existing buildings that one might say are sick and making them well. And in a sense, it's architecture healing itself, so it brings to mind that whole idea of physician heal thyself. And in particular, we saw that with both the Covington Library as well as Hopkins Hall. So I would like to invite Jack and Jennifer to offer some thoughts, but actually all of our panelists as well, in terms of when we are making interventions today, are we doing a better job than the people were doing 40 or 50 years ago? I mean, on a certain level we can say yes, but I'd like to know a little more what the panelists think about what we're doing today versus what was being done that we're trying to remedy.
I would say we probably think we're doing better, but they maybe thought they were doing pretty well back then too. And so, time will tell. We've got, a lot of ideas around sustainability, natural light, and how to bring outside space to inside space, and that it makes us all feel better about just being inside the buildings. And, I guess who knows what the prevailing thoughts will be, 50 years from now.
Yeah, I think that's an issue. I've been around long enough to know that 20 years from now, what were they thinking, And so, but I think the idea of bringing a new old building back to life was something that really, exciting with us. I mean, because that building was dark and it was old and, it was split windows and and the board said, if it's like this when you're done, we're gonna hate you, But so they wanted a really bright, open building and gave us the whole building. Essentially, what we did was we gutted the whole building, and started over, But the interesting part about that is they were in the building the whole time we did it. And the library was open the whole time. We added on 13,000 square feet, and completely renovated the whole building with a new mechanical system. And they were in that the whole time. So, but the fact that that was the place for that building to be still, it was in this neighborhood, it was this urban context, and the fact that we could bring it back and make it kind of a new statement. Essentially, what we did is we just saw what the function needed to be, superimposed it onto the thing we had, and we added on where we had to make it be a whole new building.
Yeah, I don't think you can say enough about like the transforming the user, visitor, customer experience from what they previously experienced into what the new space, because there's a dramatic emotional connection to any kind of space that you enter, and a feeling of preference, right? And the feeling of well-being. And the example of the students that left because they were miserable or didn't want to come there because they were miserable there, but have come back and have said, actually, this is a place I can see myself. Having someone being able to see themselves in that space.
I'm interested. I feel like when from my background, coming from a different country, a different city in Hong Kong, we never had that kind of struggle with kind of these old modern building, really. But then when I come here, I realize modern building has a connotation that has a really bad rap, for a lot of people. They say, oh, that's too modern. Oh, that's and when I study those buildings, a lot of times they are from the 70s or from maybe even the 60s. And I'm just really curious, like, what are they thinking? What were they thinking when they designed it? Because I would say that we did a great job these days to transforming this and make it more open, make it have a lot more natural lights. We really take a really humanistic approach to think about how we organize the spaces and how you move through the space. But if you look at those buildings, even if brand new, 30 years ago, it would not be a very pleasant building to be in. I mean, it's just a different mentality. I feel like back then when they are designing these things, they have a different set of priority, different sense of sensibilities and mentality to design those things the way that they did back then.
I think you can see a relationship between, how design manifested itself, in that era versus today. And you look what was going on politically, in kind of the world landscape, and here in this country, what the tensions were. I think you see a lot of that reflected in how design in all fields probably manifested. To talk about bringing back people into spaces that they want to be in. We really knew we hit a home run on this one. The dean told me that the students hosted a potluck in their studio spaces. So where they couldn't get the students to stay in the space and work together previously, now they couldn't really get them to leave. They were having dinner everywhere.
Well, with this library, the use went up. It's gone up 40% so far. I mean, but it's interesting though. I was part of that in the 70s, and so that's why I said, no. But it was a time when buildings were more pulled in, and these split windows were, it was almost even energy. The idea was we don't need so many windows in buildings, and that was a trend. And I think we're kind of,
it's a different understanding.
That idea has changed a lot. And
Technology did a lot of that to us, too.
It did, and the fact that we can go back and maybe correct some of that is great.
It seems to me that it has something to do with the way in which design philosophy is taken, perhaps maybe the intensity, maybe the detachment, theoretical detachment, because one might suggest that the work from the 1960s or 70s was theoretically there was a whole argument in favor of it, working for it, but in terms of how it actually translates into the humanitarian human landscape, it's a whole other matter. And I don't know if there's any further reaction. I think we've covered this pretty well, but in terms of how today, what is our perception of design philosophy and humanitarian interests?
One thing these buildings had for them, and I think Hopkins had the same thing. The bones were really good. These buildings, they were these concrete buildings with good, flexible bones that you could do this with. I mean, it was there. So I think that was, and seeing what you guys did too. That
But I also think that like the 70s is also a response to maybe an even earlier, modernism. I mean, if you look at East Van der Rohe, if you look at, Crown Hall, I mean, it's all glass. I mean, it has all the natural light you want, but it's not insulated. You know, it's cold as heck in the winter. And then all of a sudden realize, well, shit, we need to insulate our building better. And we don't have as much, you know, I think technology also play a role back then versus now that we know how to insulate a building much better than we know how to orient the building, we know how to do all those things that we didn't really think about that as much back then.
It was probably an extreme reaction.
Right.
If you've been in Crown Hall, the students don't stay up there when the sun's out, you know, because they can't stand it because there's too much light.
Yeah, it's too much light in it, yeah.
And this was the opposite. In the 70s, we did this, so it's interesting how we were striking a good meaning.
I can't speak directly about, because Driving Park was a new build, obviously, but so in terms of it being versus a renovation, I can't speak to the idea. The existing library was like 2 blocks down the street, and it was about, so I think our library was about 2.5 times the size of the existing. So one of the similarities is that there, a lot of the so everybody's really familiar with the old library in the community. Everybody that uses it uses the new library, and they're obviously interested in kind of expanding the reach of the customers. And the old building was built in '72, and it was, I think there was a sense of, given the area where it is, there was a sense of that was a secure place to be. That was a place for a lot of kids go there after school and spend a lot of time there from school until their parents come get them, which may be when the library closes. So there's a sense of security. So it has this kind of like bunker mentality where the building's out of brick, and then there's these like few punched openings. And I think that what we tried to do was kind of understand the use model and how people were using it, which technology, Jack knows and Mike know with libraries is changing like every day. And so we had to kind of balance and kind of reframe how that usage could transport to a new building. And I think we had a large contingency of people. We did some interviews when we were there, and a lot of people, and I expect it's the same with the renovation, like this is how I currently use the space, and you want to kind of help them understand how they could be either doing something similar or adapt kind of the way they see a building with the way you frame the architecture. And I think that what we wanted to be really mindful of was the sense that you have because Driving Park had such a strong youth population, and they're going there to game, and they're going there to use the computer, but they're also the people that were saying, hey, I like to go and read quietly at a library, big surprise. So we really wanted to make sure that those two types of uses were being kind of transported to the new library, and I think it's interesting.
The other thing that struck me about these projects, going back to site, first of all, we have 2 projects that really do a fantastic job of holding the street edge. The Maloney Health and the Driving Park Library. It's very important. I mean, zoning might have played a role in that, but we oftentimes will see in communities where the parking is placed in front of the building is set back and really doesn't have the presence that I think personally that and many people do ought to have. At the same time, we also have a project that is in contrast to that, the Battelle Metro Park Nature Center. The idea that it's actually an open space, but at the same time, you are also meeting some very tight site constraints because of the natural landscape and designated areas where you could and could not build and did not want to build. I'm not sure if I can tie those 2 points together, but perhaps you can. I just would be interested in hearing more about working with site and how that was a driving factor in what you did.
I mean, I think any good architecture is a product of looking at the influences of like the context, both social and cultural or natural, that's around it. And so I think that would be what would tie them together, I guess, if that's what the goal is. But I mean, it's kind of interesting hearing about like trying to repair all of these things, because actually what we were trying to do was not harm this really immaculate landscape that was out there. So we were coming at it from a very different approach in that regard. But I think all good architecture should be really carefully looking at its context. So for the Nature Center, it was really carefully understanding the topography and the ecology around it, which is a little different than something like Driving Park or Maloney, which is trying to understand the kind of sociocultural, socioeconomic kind of context.
So both projects, I mean, all the projects have the parameters and constraints for site, but they're understood in different ways. Now, for you, for the park, nature center, it would be not holding a street edge per se, but I'm just curious. Was there? I mean, you try to minimize as much impact to the topography as possible. I expect when you laid out the plan, or
It was understanding the topography and using it to our advantage. I wouldn't say that it was minimally invasive. Hopefully, it doesn't appear to be just. We weren't trying to destroy the landscape, obviously, but we were trying to, make it do something exciting. Yeah, which I mean, the building anything there was going to alter the landscape. So the other approach would have been to try to just like kind of lightly rest it on it, but. It was going to add a driveway, it was going to add a parking lot, it was going to add a building in a spot that didn't have it before. So I think the attitude here was that we were going to respect it and respect the ecology around it. But like any project, you want to use that context to your advantage to really make the project sing as much as possible.
I think what your project does so beautifully, and I don't know if this is how you would articulate this if it was a goal, but when I look at the work, I think that you allowed the building to be secondary to the landscape. It's so well to have done it so well that even it's a beautiful building, but its setting allows it to be what it is, and it doesn't try to trump the site.
That was the biggest driver from the beginning. Was that site was more important than the building. That was, I mean, both from a mission standpoint for Metro Parks. I mean, they're about celebrating the things that are outside the building, not that. So the building is automatically in deference to that, and so the kind of siting and how we positioned it really was trying to get people to understand that context first, and then bring them into the building. And that, I mean, the entry is pretty. You don't really, you kind of stumble upon it all of a sudden. That was intentional, and we wanted to kind of frame the landscape, bring you through the landscape.
It's wonderful. I've been there. It's really wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I've been there many times because we have kids, and I think the first time when we got there, I mean, the beauty of that for me, like you said, it's secondary, but it's almost become part of the landscape, right? I mean, it's very intentional that you have a little hill in front of the building, and the building has a green roof, kind of continuing that slope. When you approach that, when you're going down, to the entrance of the building. So I mean, it's basically almost trying to make the building disappear, except that frame at the end, and you know, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be going.
Yeah.
Or they will be lost, probably.
Right.
So I mean, I think that's the beauty of that particular project.
Absolutely. Tim, your project is just in a different category, but I think again, obviously, it responds to site and to humanitarian interests. Not so much about fixing a sick building, but
Right.
I would like to engage you just more in terms of what you think of the potentials for architectural installations. I mean, certainly we see those in the glossy publications, but what do you think the impact of?
I mean, I think one of the things, like we talk about constraint, talk about context, I mean, one of the things everyone or everything we do as architect is respond to a lot of condition that is being given to you from the clients, and from budget standpoint, from the site standpoint, from user standpoint. And I think a lot of these temporary structure, the cool thing about it is it's a lot cheaper to do these things, and has an actually very high impact. It's like a low cost and high impact kind of approach. And I think you see that in Brooklyn, the PS1, they have one every year. Obviously, they have a different kind of budget. I mean, in London, Hyde Park, they have another one that do that every year. And actually, if you look at, I was just actually on one of the online, I think it's DC or something, that they have the top 10 temporary structure of the year. And you look through those things, and it's just amazing. I mean, people, are doing it all over the world. And some of them are more permanent, some of them are really temporary, but they create a condition where you completely transform. Normally, it's in a space that you're not really allowed to do that. Like imagine you go to the common and you do something really crazy for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and then it's gone after that. I mean, that is a huge impact, but it also make a huge difference in terms of how you experience the city, how you experience the places that you normally go to, and create that impact that people all of a sudden realize, oh wow, I didn't know that we can do something like that. And I think that's the lesson that we learn. And in fact, speaking of that, we are trying to actually build the Willows in Columbus. We're actually working with different partnerships. We're working with the Harmony Project. We're working with the foundation, GCAC, and trying to actually build that for performance. And then we are trying to transport that from one side to another side during the art festival. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, I think we should do more of that kind of stuff. I mean, just scaffolding. I mean, it's really like cheap to do that. I mean, most is obviously labors and the material is minimum, especially in the summer. You don't need to insulate anything.
Right.
Well, I would like to bring this to conclusion, and thank you all for coming. Just a brief note about design talks for 2015. We will be starting, the first segment of next year will be in February, but we're changing the format, and we're still in the process of working out the logistics, but we will be looking to have this be on site in various firm offices here in Columbus, and we will tailor the topics, I think, to our site. So I think that'll make it kind of an interesting transformation from how we've done it here this year, which has been very successful. So again, thank you.